Well, I've been asked a question about the 7 days of creation in Genesis. It goes a bit like this: how do we as Christians hold the 7 days of creation with the existence of ancient artefacts from different civilisations and things like dinosaur bones? And the question was asking about the age of the earth and how many things would date it much older than that. So let's start with the 7 days. It is true that the Bible presents us with a creation account which is strongly framed actually by the 7 days. That's the framework, and there really isn't any escaping this 7-day framework. If we try to argue that the 7 days could be interpreted as 7 indefinitely long periods of time, it doesn't in fact resolve many problems or create much alignment between a literal interpretation of this Bible passage and the current understanding of science. But what if a literal interpretation is in fact correct? I mean, we must acknowledge, mustn't we, that for God this would not be a problem. It would not be a problem for him to make our Earth and our solar system virtually instantaneously. He could have created a universe in motion. This does create some interesting logistics. For example, we have stars very far away from us that God would have had to re-engineer in some ways. The closest starlight takes only 4 years to reach us, but some of those stars, well, the light appears to have been travelling for 9 billion years for it to reach us. And so without this re-engineering, we still wouldn't be seeing those stars for a very, very long time, even if they were created on day 4. So the literal interpretation of Genesis requires that God reverse engineered a bunch of stuff, radioactivity in carbon dating, dinosaur bones, the gradual erosion of rock layers in the Grand Canyon, and so on. And of course, God could have put it all there and just made it work and just made it look really old. If you are a 7-day creationist and reckon that we're living on a young Earth, this is a reasonable faith position. But we need to be very honest about that. It is a faith position rather than a scientific one. It will be better not to try and convince the scientific community that really the evidence points towards a young Earth, because it doesn't. But if you are convinced that God did it that way, that's okay, and maybe he did. On the other side of this debate, I would like to start not with science but with the Bible, because we must acknowledge that these opening chapters of Genesis are not trying to do science. They are expressing an origins account which emphasizes God's active role, that God created every class and category of material and life with order and purpose. The 7-day framework is there in the text, and the text has a genre, and it's very reasonable to read this as theology, or some would say poetry, rather than as historical narrative. This too is a reasonable way to interpret the passage. And we know that God does not lie. It is hard to believe that God would want to trick us with physical evidence. And I personally think that if we find dinosaur bones, then it's because the dinosaurs were here. And if the Earth looks very old, then it is old. And if the starlight is from very far away in time and space, then it actually travelled to us from there. So that is my personal opinion. But in conclusion, the Bible can be interpreted as a historical narrative or as theology and poetry. God may have created the world in 7 days and have reverse engineered many things, or God may wish to see us to see his thumbprints and his purposes for a world which is very much older.